You want the good news or the bad news? It's always the good news and the bad news. I want you to imagine first in your mind the story of the book of Genesis, how it begins and how it ends. If we want to understand Jacob, we have to understand the big picture. Most of the time when you watch a show or a movie or you read a great piece of literature, if it starts out good, what happens? It gets not too good. And then how does it end? It ends way better. And then other times when you read a story and if it starts out not too good, what happens next? It gets better. And then how does it end? It gets not too good. Shakespeare called this comedy and tragedy. Genesis is a comedy. It's a good story. But there's a lot of stuff in it, a lot of junk. We have to know that. We have to know that there's a lot of stuff in it and there's a lot of junk. I was going to begin with the story of Jacob, but then I realized it doesn't begin with the story of Jacob. This story, this little snippet of Jacob in the wilderness, I don't know if you know how the story goes. Jacob is in the wilderness for a reason. He encounters God, but he's running from his brother who's trying to kill him. His brother is trying to kill him because Jacob is a crafty fellow. He's ambitious. He's really smart. And he has deceived his brother not once but twice and stolen from him. And now he's running from his life. When he was in his mother's womb, fearfully and wonderfully being made, he and his brother Esau were already fighting amongst themselves. And the Lord prophesied to his mother Rebekah, and he said, "You have two nations in your womb, they are quarreling." They are two brothers fighting amongst themselves. And she said, "If it is to be this way, why do I live?" It is the cry of every mother as she watches her two sons fighting amongst themselves. And it's, I think, Charlie Brown who said, "Can't we all just get along?" That was not Charlie Brown. Be careful about being the chosen people of God. Isaac was chosen of God, and so was Jacob, and so was Abraham. And their families were a mess. Jacob's family, the 12 sons, they were a mess. Even the families of God, of the saints of the Old Testament, their families were a mess. Do you remember how the story begins in Genesis? God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and it was good. He said, "Let there be animals," and it was good. And he said, "Let there be plants," and it was good. He said, "Let there be creatures and living life and wonderful things," and it was good. "Let there be stars in the heavens," and it was good. And then he made human beings. And you know what he said when he made human beings? "It is very good." Everything is really, really good and even very good. It's wonderful and beautiful, and the Lord is pleased and delighted in it. And you know the first thing in the Bible that God says it is not good? You need to know this, because this is the linchpin that ties it all together. Because remember, human beings are made in the image of God, and God is triune. One person in three. And he makes Adam. And the first thing, after everything was so good and so very good, he says, "It is not good that man is alone." It is not good that man is alone. And now we see the thing in the entire Bible. That's the thing. That's the problem. We are not made to be alone. The last time I was here, it was interesting. We celebrated our independence. And I always smile when I celebrate independence, and I appreciate it. But we are not made to be independent, and we cannot be. We are not made to be alone. I have this image in my mind of a man on a ship, and the ship is sinking, and as the ship is sinking, he goes to the upper deck, and it sinks some more, and it goes to the upper deck, and it sinks some more, and he goes to the upper deck until he gets up to the very top, and he's holding on the mast, and the thing is sinking. And he said, all I wanted was to be independent. We cannot be alone, and we always have to have a place to stand. Do you know what happens in the garden after God says, it is not good that man is alone? He brings another human being into the world and brings them together, and he said, we got it now. We have a Trinity. Just as God is triune, it is us in relation to God and our neighbor. It is us in relation to God and our brother. It is us in relationship to God and our sister. And so the great command, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. This is entering into a triune existence, a triune being. Love God, love neighbor, and love self. After God creates this good existence in His image, this triune life, this triune being, it starts to get interesting. What happens? They're in the garden, and Adam and Eve are there, and God is even in their midst, this triune life. And there's the tree. And they see the tree, and it's beautiful, and it's good. It's strange that it is always the good things and the beautiful things that are the beginning of sin. It's something to keep in mind that we do not ever do what we think is evil. We always do what we believe is good. We never do what we know is evil. We always do what we believe is good. It is a distortion of what is good that leads us into sin. And be careful. As I understand, you are entering into the process of calling a pastor. It will be your pursuit of what is good that will lead you into sin. It will be your desire to create a garden that will till the soil. Adam and Eve are in the garden, and they see the tree, and they say it is good, and they reach out, and it says they grasp it, they snatch it. That's the tree that they have been instructed, don't eat from the tree. And do you know what happens next? Their eyes are opened, and they see what? They see their nakedness. I don't know if you've ever sinned before. I don't know if you've ever been naked around other people. Have you ever had that dream when you were a kid? That dream when you were walking into high school, and when you show up, you realize, oh, I'm totally naked, the walk into school naked dream. My adult nightmare is to walk into church. I actually have preaching dreams, preaching nightmares. And my preaching nightmare is not nakedness, but it is showing up, not realizing that I'm preaching, and I'm in sweaty pants and a holy t-shirt. There's something to this idea of feeling naked and fearing being naked and being seen. Because that's that moment in which Adam and Eve recognize and see that they are naked. Richard Nixon is right. It's not the crime, it's the cover-up. It's not the crime, it's the cover-up. What they do is they begin first to hide in the bushes. And it's true that sin causes us to hide from ourselves and from one another, isn't it? When you're feeling guilty or ashamed and you know that you've done wrong, you hide it. And we hide it from God. They're in the garden, in a garden, hiding in the bushes. because they're naked. And of course, God comes through the garden and he says, hey, what are you guys doing? And they had covered themselves up with bushes and then covered themselves up with the big bush. And God says, have you eaten from the tree? You see, because of sin, we hide from one another and we hide from God. Because of sin, because of our nakedness and because of our shame, we hide from one another and we hide from God. And it creates a problem, because remember how we were created. And remember the great existential problem. It is not good that man is alone. So now on the one hand, we're trying to be in relation to God and one another, and yet we're hiding from God and hiding from one another. And this is how we live. This is how we live. We live covered up. We live worried about what we wear because I want you to see that I'm worthy of respect. You wouldn't listen to what I have to say if I showed up in sweaty pants and a holy t-shirt, would you? And if I drove in a clunky old car, you would think, this guy doesn't have his poo together. I work as a counselor, and I talked to a man once, and he drove in to meet me in a black, beautiful, shiny Jaguar. That wasn't a Jaguar. I think it was a Mercedes. It was nice. It was very sharp. He spent almost all day washing it and waxing it and cleaning it. And then he told me about his house. He used to see my house. He lived in Cranberry, and he lived in one of those ginormous houses. And on the outside, all the shrubs were perfect. Everything was perfect. You know, we hide behind perfection, don't we? I want you to see these perfect things over here, and it's a way that I cover up my nakedness, my sinfulness, and my shamefulness. There's a great barrier between each one of us, and it is the house we live in and the car we drive and the hair that I combed. Because if you see this, you'll respect me and you'll love me and you'll care about me and you'll include me. Those are our bushes and the garments that we use to cover ourselves up because we know that we do not belong. Not belong. All of the things that we do to belong, to be loved and to be respected, the outside things that we put on are the very things that stand in the way. We do not know ourselves and we do not come to one another in the manner in which we see and know who we really are. And that's the thing, you know. They're in the bushes and they're hiding from God, and you know what happens next? God says, "Where are you? Have you eaten from the tree?" And Adam pops out of the bushes in his grass skirt. And God asks him that question. He says, "Have you eaten from the tree?" And I believe that this is the linchpin question of all of history. Have you eaten from the tree? Because you know this is an invitation to take off your clothes again and to be honest. And you know what Adam does? Holy cow. He says, "Lord, the woman that you put here, made me do it. And the serpent deceived me." So he turns not only from hiding, but then he turns to judgment and attack and blame. And in his nakedness, hiding in his grass skirt, he blames God. And he blames his wife. And you know what's amazing about that is in the court of law, he knew what the punishment was, right? The punishment for eating from the tree was death. And so when the Lord says, "Did you eat from the tree?" he said, "She did it. And he's condemning his wife to death. And so this is the nature of sin. I want you to see it. I want you to know how it works. This process churns and churns throughout all of history, and it is very present in the church. It is very present among the people of God. It's right at the center of who we are. Now, just as that person I was talking about earlier drives the fancy car and dresses in the nice clothes and always shows up dapper, I'll never forget this conversation. Guess what we talked about? He said, I never told anybody this, but I have this big house and these beautiful hedges, but I have no furniture. I have no furniture. I have no table. I have no chairs. I can't afford it. In fact, the reason I'm here is because I'm broke and I'm getting ready to file bankruptcy. You see, this beautiful car, he never lets anyone in it. And if he invited someone into his house, he never invites anyone in, He never invites anyone in, for there is no place to sit. And he does not want anyone to see how empty he is. And he doesn't get it. He's trying to build a garden. He's trying to build a beautiful. And if I build a beautiful garden and have a beautiful place, then someone will want to come and be with me. And if I build a beautiful house, someone will want to come and I'll have a life. But it's never good enough. It's never good enough. It's never big enough. It's never beautiful enough. He never feels safe around anyone because he knows that there's emptiness and he's always covering it up. This is called alienation. Alienation. It takes many forms. It takes every form. It is a kind of separation where you could be sitting across the table from someone and you have no idea who they are and they have no idea who you are. And you smile and you say nice things and you treat them with respect and you give them a brownie or a Danish. But it's a beautiful car and it's a hedge and it's a house. It's this facade that we create and we do not let anyone in. We can be friends and yet deeply separated. I know you sat this way at Thanksgiving with your family. All those things that you can't talk about. I know you have session meetings just like that, where all those things that you can't talk about. And you know the sign of a good family, right? The sign of a good family, a healthy family of God, is that we have no conflict. The absence of conflict is the hallmark of a good family. My other favorite counseling session is between a husband and wife, and they show up for their first counseling session. And I say, well, tell me about your relationship. And you know the first thing that the husband says? We've been getting along great. We've been married for 10 years, and we never fight. And I said, whoa. Because after 10 years, it's going to take a long time to get through the hedges to see the truth. And you know who the biggest jerk is in the room? He's the guy that says, hey, there's a problem over here. Do you see that over there? Could this be something that's not good? I don't know what you're talking about. Blame the messenger. Hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. And you'll see it's super fun when a new visitor comes in. They say, hey, tell me about your church. You know what you're going to say? Have you seen our new bushes? And we're growing. We have all this growth. We had 20 kids. 20 kids at the Vacation Bible School. We're growing. As you guys are moving forward into the process of seeking and finding a new pastor, it is going to be about learning how to see and talk about conflict. It's about conflict. That's the beauty of Jacob. He is born into conflict, and he was wrestling and fighting with his brother at birth. At birth. Anytime you read a story in the Bible or anywhere else about two brothers, there is a great shadow that lurks behind. You know what that shadow is? It's the story of Cain and Abel. Whenever there's two brothers, there is always Cain and Abel. And that's real, and that's who we are. There's rivalry and jealousy and strife and conflict. And the question is not whether it's there, the question is whether we see it and what we do about it. Whether we see it and what we do about it. And that's the story of the gospel. That is the story of the gospel. Psalm 139. Think how scary this is. When I read this and I'm not in like a swooning for God moment, this scares the bejesus out of me. Because I have my hedges too, and I don't like anybody snooping around. And then this is what I hear about God. "O Lord, you have searched me, and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise, you perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all of my ways." Adam and Eve were hiding in the bushes thinking that God didn't know or see. And that's a scary thing, and it's a wonderful thing. Jacob is fleeing from his brother Esau, who's trying to kill him. That's where our story begins. Jacob has stolen his birthright. He has stolen his blessing. He has stolen his brother's future. And now he is running for his life. And what's fascinating about this is the family of God. Abraham. Remember Abraham? He's on this journey of God, this chosen one, and he goes into Egypt, and when he gets into Egypt, he gets really scared. And he says, "Oh my goodness, my wife is really, really good looking. They're going to try to kill me." He also is always hiding and fleeing and covering up because the world is a dangerous and scary place, and it does not pay to be naked or open. It does not pay to have the courage of someone who is transparent. Even Abraham hid and deceived and was crafty. And that's what Jacob is famous for. He's the trickster. His name even implies his craftiness. These are the people of God. And his family, Jacob's family, he has all these sons, the 12 sons. You know who comes after Jacob, the story, is the 12 brothers and Joseph. Cain and Abel are still alive and well. And because of their jealousy, Jacob is separated from his sons. His sons send Joseph into slavery, convince and lie and tell their father that he's dead. This is the family of God. "O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know when I sit and when I rise, you perceive my thoughts from afar. You discern my going out and my lying down. You are familiar with all of my ways. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely. Where can I go from your spirit, and where can I flee from your presence?" That's a good question, isn't it? Where can we hide from God? I guess that's a good thing, right? except when I need the bushes. Back to Adam. Remember, he's coming out of the bushes and God asks them that question, have you eaten from the tree? And he's standing there in his breeches. This is important. This is God's question, and it's an invitation to confession. Confession is not something we do or say to pursue forgiveness. Confession is about speaking truth and about being transparent. Confession is truth. Have you eaten from the tree? The answer is yes. Have mercy, O Lord. And I wonder at the beginning of the story, if Adam would have popped out of the bushes and asked for confession, and he said, forgive me, O Lord, yes, I have sinned. If there would have been the rest of the story. I wonder if we would have had Cain and Abel, and I wonder if we would have had Noah, and I wonder if we would have had Abraham and Jacob and Joseph and Moses and Isaiah and Jeremiah. Because there's a lot of wilderness that comes when we cannot confess and we cannot speak truth. The Lord is always calling us to speak truth to one another into the problem of conflict. And you know what he does that's strange? He makes a promise. This is at the heart of the story of Jacob. Remember the one fleeing in the wilderness, running from his family, from his God? This is exile. This is someone who has nothing. He has no one. Jacob is the one standing at the mast of the sinking ship. And when the ship goes down, it's him swimming. He's independent, you know. And the Lord meets him in this place when he's alienated from everyone. The Lord meets him here because the Lord is the only one he has left. And you know, I wonder if it's not the Lord that is crafty and tricky. Because you remember that Jacob is our achiever. He's our go-getter. He's the ambitious one. He's the hard worker. He's really smart and gifted and talented. And there's only one way that the Lord can ever, it seems, get through to this kind of person. He comes to him in the dark when he's sleeping, in secret in the night, and appears to him in a dream. There's something to that, you know. And you need to know this, that if Jesus walked into this church today, would you recognize him? What would he be dressed like? What kind of car would he drive? You need to think about this, because when you call your pastor, you're going to be asking the same questions. If Jesus came into this congregation at this moment, and he is indeed here, and we don't see him, but if Jesus came in, would he be driving a Jaguar, shiny and buffed up? Would he be speaking eloquently and with great wisdom? Would he have a really good criminal record? I can assure you, when you are inviting new members of this congregation, you're not interested in the poor guy, the homeless guy, the guy with no shoes. Because you see, when the church or when the people of God are in the wilderness, you know what they start thinking about? Their daily bread, and where are we going to get money from? And we got to grow, and we need more people. We need to grow. And we don't need the guy that can't give. We don't need the guy that can't give. We're always trying to rebuild this garden as a way of making ourselves and our lives whole. We're always trying to build the garden. And it is only when we enter into the wilderness, when God strips down all the vegetation and He gets the people out of the way, and all of those unhealthy attachments that we have, unhealthy attachments. It's when God strips all of those away and comes to us in the night, when we can't trick Him anymore. And listen to what He says to Jacob. I have to find it, excuse me. I am the Lord your God, the God of your father Isaac and Abraham. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. And here it is. Do you remember the great problem of the Bible, the thing that is not good? It is not good that man is alone. Guess what God is doing through Jacob? All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. You see, through this alienation of Jacob, He's sending him out into the world with nothing so that Jacob can bless the world. He is alienating him from his own family so that he can begin a work of reconciliation amongst the families of all the world. It is this process of alienation that begins the process of reconciliation. The story begins with Adam and Eve alienated from one another, hiding in their nakedness. Do you know how the book of Genesis ends? Remember the beginning and the end? It is Joseph and his brothers. Remember the brothers that had sold him into slavery? It's Joseph and his brothers and Jacob's word. And the brothers say to Joseph, because they're afraid, and he said, our father wanted you to forgive us. Our father wanted you to forgive us. Please forgive us, and we will be your servants. It begins with this alienation with Adam and Eve, and it ends with the reconciliation and forgiveness of brothers. And there's a whole lot of junk in between. And so it gives us our worship. It gives us a process of going out into the world and gathering amongst one another, preaching the word, being called by God, standing up and confessing, being promised forgiveness, and then going back out into the world to be a blessing to all nations. This is the work of God. It's not a beginning and end. It's a process that we do over and over and over and over and over. My charge to you is to be courageous. In your session meeting, speak truth and forgive one another. At your dinner table with your family, you know, that imperfect family that you have the courage to speak truth to one another and be transparent and confess and promise that there will be forgiveness. And in our community, go out and preach the truth and be transparent and confess and promise and insist on forgiveness. Do not hide in the bushes and do not hide behind your clothes. Life is not about alienation, and we are not called to be alone. Be careful of anyone who tells you to be independent. Because peanut butter is not made to be alone. You know that feeling, that existential fear you get? You know the greatest fear that all human beings have? It's two. And it begins in Genesis 1 and 2. One is the fear of death. And there's one greater than that. The fear of being alone. And the greatest fear that I have ever heard from anyone is their great fear is, I'm afraid of dying alone. When God shows up to Jacob in the wilderness, He says, I will be with you and I will keep you. I will be with you and I will keep you. And this, by the way, I said there's the bad news and then there is the good news. And the good news is Jesus Christ, the incarnation. You know what incarnation is? It is in the flesh, dwelling among us. Emmanuel, God with us. He promised to Jacob in the wilderness, I will be with you. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. And He promised the same thing to Moses. Go to the land that I will show you, and you will worship on this mountain, and I will be with you. And then a child was born, and they named him Emmanuel, God with us. And you know, even in death, Jesus kept His promise of being with them, because you know what He did? Even in death, He rose from the dead, and He said, I will be with you until the end of the age. It is a wonderful and terrible thing. We cannot hide from the Lord. Sometimes we want to. The promise is real. He is with us. He will not abandon us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.